Dude, first off, I want to say, like, if my 9-year-old self knew that I was going to be interviewing the person who played Sub-Zero in Mortal Kombat,
Oh
like, he
God.
would completely, like, freak out. Like, that's incredible. He was the guy. He was my go-to guy in that game, man.
Oh my God. Okay. First, thanks for the compliment, but now I feel like thanks for that too.
Well, okay, so like, well, first of all, like, I went to film school. I'm a filmmaker, so I gotta say, I gotta give you props. Documentary filmmaking is probably the hardest form of filmmaking I've ever seen, or just witnessed in my life. These things take years to finish, and so much time, and they truly are projects of passion. Can you talk about how you decided to do a documentary about Midway?
Yeah. So to your point of what you just talked about, it's that's definitely a moment where it's like ignorance is bliss type of thing. I didn't know what I was getting myself into, to be quite honest with you. So yeah, it was quite the undertaking. But the reason why I did this documentary about Midway was a lot of people know these games, Mortal Kombat, NBA Jam, Smash TV, and everything. And but like I was in a unique position where I was kind of living through that era at the company, and I had a lot of insight on it. And I kind of knew like how these games developed, the people behind them, the personalities, and how their personalities affected the game design and things like that. So I felt like nobody's really talked about that story. And I think just video game documentaries in general don't really touch on that as much as I kind of wish they would. I mean, there are some great documentaries out there, but I just thought that the Midway story was really unique in that people love the games, but there's just this rich history behind them.
Yeah, I mean, there was a recent documentary, Insert Coin, and that was a series on Netflix. But as a gaming enthusiast and journalist, like, there was so much information they left out, and they kind of have to, otherwise the documentary would be 90 hours long, And so, how were you able to shift through the information and kind of choose, like, okay, we have enough time to include this, but not this. This is more important than this. Like, that kind of. Those are some hard decisions you have to make as a director.
Yeah, extremely hard decisions. Yeah, the old saying is you have to kill your babies, and happened like many times. So I mean, there are whole edited segments that were taken out just for various reasons. And there was so much decision making going on. Part of it is is this too inside baseball, or is it too light? And I had to kind of thread the needle here, because it was I have two audiences I needed to be mindful of. One is the hardcore gamer out there that knows the stuff, that really loves these these games, and making sure that I put something out there that's new and interesting for them. Sometimes it's completely new information, sometimes it's new information looked at it at a different from a different angle. But then on the other side is you can't get too inside baseball, so I had to figure out, like, all right, somebody who doesn't know anything about these games, are these interesting tidbits or factoids or whatever, is it going to be interesting enough for people who may not know what Smash TV is, but they understand why it got made? So there's always that balance. And yeah, at one point I had like a 4-hour cut of the film, and it was just massive, and for a minute I thought, well, maybe a docuseries would be kind of good. But then when I really looked at it, it's like it was just too much information, and ultimately I had to really be disciplined and tell myself, this needs to be something that flows very well. So if anything feels like it's repeating something, or it just feels like it's information that is going to only be interesting for one audience and not the other, I had to just keep editing that down. So there was no like one rule that I had. It was just really a gut feeling. Like, every time I watched it, did this feel like it slowed things down, or does it go off the rails because we talked about a certain subject and now that subject is too weighty and nobody else cares for the rest of the film?
Now, how long did this documentary take you to film? Obviously, you're in the editing process now, and the follow-up question to that is, did COVID-19 and stay-at-home orders affect the development of this documentary toward the end?
Yeah, so it altogether, it from beginning to end, it took about 5 years to make the film, and but I took a lot of breaks in between, and it's funny because I thought it was going to take a couple of years to make, so that was my own naivety. But in talking with other documentary filmmakers, many of them take up to 10 years to make their film. So I didn't feel as bad for taking so long on it, but it did take a long time. But if I were to concentrate it down to, just the number of hours or days, it was probably altogether about 3 years. There were certain times where I just took a break from the film, and because the film really didn't have a deadline, this is my own, personal passion project. I only wanted to work on it when I really felt super motivated, or something new came up, I would do that. And so I had the luxury of taking my time. Luckily, it was pretty much done before this whole COVID thing came in. The film was getting prepped for South by Southwest, which was going to happen in March. And so it was more or less done. There's like little things here and there that still need to get worked on. Then obviously, COVID hits, the world turns upside down, and plans change. And so in many ways, the silver lining about all this is that I was able to kind of go in and just kind of tighten some things up, add a little bit of extra polish on things here and there. And it's that last, 1% of polish, I think really, helps, any project out.
And just because someone like me, I'm like a film kind of, I'm kind of a film guy, obviously. So what did you shoot your documentary on, and what are you editing with? Like, what are the tools to make it?
Yeah, so I was in making the film, I wanted to make sure that I wasn't overburdening myself. And one of the things was to get the interviews, let's say, I want to make sure that I can shoot as much as I can by myself. There are going to be times where I'm going to have a crew, but I didn't want to rely on them. And part of the reason is because the people I'm interviewing are my old coworkers. There's a certain comfort level there, right? And the issue is that I was hoping to get very good, intimate, and candid responses from them. And I felt like if I had a room full of people, it was going to feel, kind of stilted. And so my setup was a single camera. And in my case, it was a Panasonic GH4, 4K camera. I made sure that I had a lavalier mic that wasn't wireless, because I didn't want to have to worry about batteries. Like if I'm shooting by myself, I need to keep it as streamlined as possible. So, wired lav, a simple 4K camera. I had very simple LED battery operated lights that I can take anywhere, and I can transfer. Everything had to fit in one bag that I can carry. And so that way I'm, between Chicago and Southern California, going back and forth and shooting people, I can basically rely on myself. Then from there, I edited in Adobe Premiere, and I'm in the whole Adobe ecosystem, mainly because I really love After Effects a lot, and I like the integration between Premiere and After Effects. And I did it all on a laptop. And initially, I did it all on my old 2013 MacBook Air using proxies. And I did that on purpose because I wanted to have that laptop with me all the time. So no matter where I'm at, if I feel like editing or working on the film, I can do that. So if I'm taking a break somewhere, I'm having lunch, I can work on the film. And I was trying to, especially during my day job in game development, it's like any spare moment I can get, I want that technology accessible. So I did it all on there until it got to a certain point where I needed to work on the source material. So then I ended up getting a MacBook Pro and working off that, but it was still a laptop. I never did the editing or post-production on a standard desktop computer.
I mean, it's kind of surreal, right? I mean, obviously you went to school for film, how much that technology has changed and made filmmaking more accessible to everybody.
Right. Yeah, no, like had I wanted to do this, let's say, 10 years ago, or not when I first came out of film school, when I was in film school, we were cutting 16 millimeter film, right? So, it was like a pain in the ass to do anything. And so, yeah, I don't think I would have been able to make this film the way I did, even maybe as recently as 5 years ago, to be honest with you. Things are so accessible now. And there's so many services out there. Just even things like I need to get subtitling done. I can sit there and do it myself, but there are services out there that'll do that for you. So the technology is really remarkable to be able to pull off something like that.
I mean, when you were graduating film school, it's interesting because people had to rent out suites that were thousands of dollars an hour to do editing, and now you have it on a MacBook Air. You can edit on your airplane. Yeah. It's absolutely insane how far it's come.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, you do it you can shoot stuff on your phone now, and and insert it in, and most people would never know.
Now, because I'd be remiss if I didn't ask, can you talk about how you got involved in Mortal Kombat 2 specifically? Was it simply as like you auditioned and showed up and they chose you? Like, how did that work?
No, it's even simpler than that. It's like it was I think within the first 2 weeks I started working at Midway, and that was one of the first jobs I got out of college, was working there. And John Tobias basically came up to me and said, "Hey, can I take a picture of your face because we want to put it in the game?" So I'm like, "Yeah, sure." And now, it's kind of weird because back then, this was, the very early 90s, and Midway, I was probably one of the only Asians in that entire studio. And so when they needed an Asian face, it's usually me. So that was like the first one. And so they just grabbed me, took a picture, and then a couple of days later, they showed me in the game as Sub-Zero at the ending for MK2. And then back then I thought, wow, that's awesome, and I didn't really make much of it. And then, 25 plus years later, people ask me about that in interviews. It's like, man, that's really surreal.
The man behind the mask. That was a big deal back then, man.
I know. It's so weird. Yeah. And again, it's like, when you're in an environment like that, everything was so just like made up on the spot as you're going along. So things like that would happen all the time, and just never realizing that, decades later, people like, there were, adults who were kids back then are talking about that. It's like, wow, that's just so strange.
I mean, it was one of the biggest franchises in the world at one point. Like it would dominated the continental United States and like other places too.
Yeah, it was insane. Like in doing the research, for the film, obviously I knew how big the franchise was, but I didn't know a lot about South America and what was going on, and also in Europe, like how big it was then. Like in Brazil, it's still like the retro Mortal Kombat stuff is massive. Like the actors who play the characters go down to South America all the time for huge conventions. I mean, like seriously, like they sell out like large venues. That's how nuts it is.
So we can talk about, I'm going to take it back again to the 90s. This is obviously a time where, arcades console technology is starting to catch up with arcades with the PlayStation and the N64. What was the environment like at Midway during that time when obviously this technology was catching up to these gigantic arcade machines?
Yeah, so there was, it was interesting times because, in the arcade industry, we were always thought of at the top of the food chain, because back then, I mean, if you compare like what you can do in an arcade machine compared to like a Super Nintendo, it was just no contest. But yeah, once, like PlayStation 1 came out and consoles started getting more and more popular, looking back on it now, so it's like, wow, that was a huge shift in technology. But there was I want to say there was a bit of arrogance on our end back then. We were so used to being at the top of the food chain that was like when these consoles came in, we would nitpick on the stupid things that it didn't do. That 3D dinosaur demo on the PlayStation 1, it's okay, but little did we know that it was like, yeah, that's what's going to be the death of arcades. Because suddenly, somebody can pay $40 to $50 for a game that can now hold 40 hours of gameplay. And in an arcade, you're dropping it 50 cents, every minute. It was just no contest, and it changed game design. Suddenly you have, something like the first Tomb Raider comes out, and it's like, whoa, this is a massive game. It's huge. People can get really immersed into it because they're playing for tens of hours, and it just changed. And people's expectations of what a game should be shifted very quickly, and that led to the death of arcade style games.
Yeah, but I mean, like, I think people like you and me were fortunate enough to actually, not only you were fortunate enough to work in it, but just experience the arcade times. Yeah. Like, I mean, because we have a staffer on our staff. He's 21, so he has no idea what arcades are, and we always make fun of him for it. But it's interesting because it was a really cool time, to be alive and see these evolutions. Like, even though I had a PlayStation 1 with games on it, I would still go to the arcades and play games like Marvel vs. Capcom or whatever, because it was still that environment that made the thing complete. My mom would drop me off and say, okay, here's $2, be back in 3 hours, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, with $2, you're like, every game is precious. You got really good at the games, right?
Yeah, or I just had to be very selective about which game. 50 cents, oh God, no, and you'd go to another machine.
Yeah, no, every game had a huge amount of weight to it and stuff. Yeah, no, I mean, it's, you know, even back then, there was nothing, even as the consoles were coming in, there was nothing like going to arcade and playing either, competitively against somebody or playing in a co-op game, and usually it was complete strangers, but it's like, it's like being in sports, you compete against each other. At the end of the day, you're fist bumping each other, whether you won or lost. And, I really missed out a lot. I mean, it's, arcades are not completely gone. You saw family fun centers and things like that, but it's that vibe that the 90s had in particular. It's definitely a lost era.
Yeah, I think it speaks volumes, because I played a lot of fighting games growing up, and
Mm-hmm.
when you lost to get someone much better than you, you would turn to them and, like you said, fist bump and say good game, and you'd strike up a conversation like, how did you do that combo? Now people just send angry messages anonymously online to you about like how you're trash because you won. It's a really sad how that demographic has changed so much.
Yeah. I mean, just the anonymity really brings out the ugliness in people, and I don't always like to wax poetic about how great the old times were, but there were certain things that that were special, and then to your point, it's like you're face to face with somebody. There's a respect when you're next to somebody like that, even if they beat the crap out of you in MK or Street Fighter or whatever. You was like, wow, that guy had some skills. Like you can see how he's playing against you just physically, and yeah, that was a lot of fun.
So talk about how this documentary was. This obviously was it? We said it was a project of passion. Was this self-funded? Did you have investors? Are you hoping to get it picked up on Netflix, Hulu, on a digital?
Yeah, so it was funded mostly through a Kickstarter campaign, a very successful Kickstarter campaign back in 2015, and so that allowed me to get the film going and such. And then I basically, beyond that, it was personally funded, so no investors, no outside stuff. I really, after working so long in game development, working for publishers and things like that, this was something I wanted to control. So I just didn't want I don't want too much outside influence. But beyond that, now we're, years later, heading into, like, on November 25th, we're going to be launching the film on virtual cinemas, partnering up with Alamo Drafthouse On Demand. And, just because it's interesting with the whole COVID thing, a new industry has pretty much arisen, which is this concept of virtual cinemas. And, Alamo Drafthouse being one of the bigger ones, they've set it up so people who love Alamo, can basically, purchase tickets to rent the film and to stream it. And we have it also with a bunch of other cinemas, especially independent local cinemas. We're partnering up with them. So when you rent the film, through them, they get a share of the revenue to help support them. And I really like that a lot. That was a concept that's fairly new, and when it was presented to us, it's like, wow, that's a really great idea. So let's get that out there, and then after that, there will be it'll be streaming on various video on demand platforms, and then we're working on other streaming platforms beyond that.
Yeah, that's it. I was just talking to Mark before I interviewed you, and he was mentioning that, like, this is a time, just like Midway had to adapt to the console generation. Yeah. This is a time for theaters. They need to adapt or they will die. You need to move on. You need to figure out a way how to get past this, because you can't. This COVID stuff isn't going away in 6 months. It's not even going away in a year. It's going to be around for a while, and they have to figure out a way to do this. It sounds like you're already up front of that. Like, you already know how to handle, like, this situation with films that people want to pay to see.
Yeah, it's ironic when you put it like that. Yeah, it is like, it's that shift in technology, and you either get in front of it and get creative, or you're just gonna get left behind. So, but yeah, it's after South by Southwest, got canceled. Like, this concept started popping up, and so we're really happy to kind of to play in that playground and see how it goes.
Oh yeah, I mean, it's when I was in college and we did our films, we had to, like, send them in on a disc or a tape. We had to pay like a $35 fee just to send them the tape, and you're like, I can only enter 6 festivals because I don't have $1 million. And just with the digital platform, it makes it so much more easier to get your film out there, like that, just to have people look at it, even if it's just like some person at that you just want to watch it. You can say, here's a link, watch it. You don't have to send an envelope with a form attached and a number on your CD or your VHS tape or beta tape or whatever. It's incredible.
Yeah, no, it is pretty. It's funny when you think about just how fast that changed.
How so talk about like how did your film school, because I went to film school, you obviously went to a better film school than I did, but I didn't feel my film school prepared me for this industry. Like a good example is our audio teacher, and this was 2006 or 7, was like, you're gonna learn on a Nagra because it's important to know this stuff. And I was like, why? Shouldn't we be learning on a DAT? Isn't that what everyone uses? So, but talk about your specific film experience in like the late 80s, early 90s.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned it. Yeah, I mean, like my film school was so long ago that, in terms of technology, like all the stuff I learned with technology of this time is obsolete. So my specialty back in the day was I learned how to do negative conforming. And that was like, you talk to somebody, they're like, what the hell is that? So I got really good at that, but it's completely obsolete. But I had, when it came to just, aesthetics and learning the craft of storytelling, things like that, I had some really great teachers. That's where it really shined. And, in many ways, I was kind of glad that back then I didn't, get too enamored with the equipment of filmmaking, and not that back then I knew, this is all going to change, it's going to go all digital. It just, I just wasn't into it. I liked the editing part for sure, but even then I thought the editing was just too cumbersome, when I was doing film cutting and such. But really just, and I took a couple of documentary classes and really immersed myself in that genre, and just, they gave me this love of just looking at the craft of directing a film, writing and editing and such. And that, became, that knowledge is universal. So I think that worked out really well. Now, with that said, I got into computer graphics toward the end of my college career because that was starting to emerge more and more. And that's what ended up getting me a job at Midway, which then, as happy as I was to be in game development, completely derailed my film career. So I didn't get to make a film until like 25 years later.
Can you talk about your role at Midway when you first joined out of college? What did you do there specifically? I'm assuming at that time you did a lot of multiple things.
Yeah. Oh yeah, back then, you think about how big game development teams are now. There's like hundreds of people, around the world, right? But back then, like the Mortal Kombat team, the original Mortal Kombat team was, I think, like 4 people. That's how small it was. So me coming in, my first game was with the NBA Jam team. We were working on this WrestleMania game, and it was 4 people through most of the development. I think we ballooned up to maybe 6. And so because of that, every person counted and every person did multiple things. So I came in as what they called a video artist, and I did everything from touching up the character sprites to shooting the video to working on background elements. It just whatever came your way. There was no specializing on things. And I'm super grateful for that because it helped me learn the craft. It forced me to stretch into things that I, didn't think I was going to be able to do. And some of it turned out really bad, some of it turned out really great and stuff. But it was great to get that well-rounded experience.
Oh, man, that is so freaking cool, man. Like, that is amazing. Just being in that. Because, at that time, video games for years were kids. They were kids' toys.
Yeah.
People just thought they were for kids.
Yep.
And, now, all the kids are grown up like me, and we're spending $500 on a Mortal Kombat to arcade one-up cabinet. It's insane. It's like you said, you have 2 audiences now. You have people like me, and then you have people who've never been in an arcade before in your life.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. It's so funny. It's like like you were talking about getting one of those arcade one-up machines. Isn't it pretty awesome? Like you get older and you have some money and you can actually buy all the things that you wanted as a kid, right? So those machines are super fun. But yeah, it's trying to make sure that it's relatable to somebody who's never been in an arcade and be able to get them to feel like they're like they've experienced at least a touch of what it was like inside an arcade. That was that's pretty important to me.
So when does your documentary, you said you're very close. Have you finalized yet? Are you done? Or are you going back and meddling with it still?
No more touching, man. No more touching. I'm done.
So when does it officially release, and where can people go to watch it and support it?
Yeah, so it's being released on November 25th on virtual cinemas, and Alamo Drafthouse On Demand is we'll be screening it, and so you can go to their website. You can also go to insertcoindoc.com, and there's a screening page, and we've partnered up with a lot of local independent theaters to do virtual cinemas with them to help support them, during these times also. And it's a really great way for people to see brand new films, from the comfort of their homes, because you can't go to theaters now.
What's the total running time on it? Did you get a final hard running time on it?
1 hour and 42 minutes.
Oh man, I'm so sorry. That's got to be brutal. From 4 hours to 1 hour. Oh
no, dude, it's so brutal.
It's so much cutting out.
yeah, it's so brutal. I mean, the one thing that that kept me sane was, I put special things in the Blu-ray. Other things that didn't make it can always go on YouTube or whatever other platforms. But there are so many ways to give homes to these deleted scenes and stuff. So that's the only thing that gave me some comfort.
Time for the extended cut a year from now.
Oh,
the 4 hour unextended cut. I would watch that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's like, I'm gonna beat the Snyder cut, man. It's I'm gonna make it longer than that.